Right, hi. In this video, I'm going to be looking at a sonnet from Sir Philip Sidney's Astrophil and Stella. Um, Astrophil and Stella is a series of sonnets written in the 1580s by this Elizabethan courtier, um, diplomat, and poet, Sir Philip Sidney. It's the first great English sonnet cycle. So as each sonnet explores some thought, it forms overall a psychological picture um, of the protagonist, Astrophil's love for Stella. Um, Astrophil meaning star lover, and Stella meaning star. And so you can see he's taken on sort of a fancy name to describe his love here, but people do connect it to a real event in his life, perhaps in which he had an opportunity to marry a young lady and then was full of regret when he didn't take it and she married someone else, and that this might perhaps map onto that real occurrence in his life, but maybe not. The book I'm reading it from, this is the Everyman edition. There's a picture of Sir Philip Sidney. Calls it his witty and intricate sequence of love sonnets, the first in English. And I think that's very true. It's very witty and intricate, although he early on explains how that other poets are always, borrowing from old poets and are always, dressing their poetry in classical allusions and, with references to stories of Jove or what have you. But that he himself, he says in Sonnet 1, um, um, that he all he has to do is look in thy heart and write. Um, but this sonnet I want to look at today is Sonnet 25, and it's not. I guess the conclusion we need to come to is that when Sir Philip Sidney looked in his heart, there were a lot of complicated intellectual references. It's a very sort of learned, witty sonnet, intricate and witty, as the back of the book said. So I'll just read it one line at a time, or two lines, and explain it, and then I'll put the sonnet down in the description. So it begins, "The wisest scholar of the wight most wise, by Phoebus' doom, with sugared sentence says." Okay, now stop just on the first line. Who is it talking about? The wisest scholar of the wight most wise. The word wight here is not the color. It's the old English word wight, and it just means like living being, creature, person. And one place that modern people might be familiar with this word is in Lord of the Rings. Tolkien uses it to describe the barrow wight, the mysterious being that lives in the barrow. But so he's talking about the wisest scholar of the wight most wise, and it goes into the next line, by Phoebus' doom. So by Phoebus' doom means like pronounced, and by Phoebus it's talking about Phoebus Apollo, and therefore it's talking about the pronouncement of the oracle of Apollo. And the pronouncement of the oracle of Apollo was that Socrates was the wisest wight. And his wisest scholar, that means his wisest student, is talking about Plato. So this first line and a half is just Plato. And it says, "With sugared sentence says, that virtue, if it once met with our eyes, strange flames of love it in our souls would raise." So what he's referring to here is something written by Plato. It's called the Symposium, and it's where it's a book in which there's a conversation between a number of Greek characters. It's at a dinner party, and Socrates talks about love in it. Talks about eros. And he famously puts forward a theory of love that we now call uh, Platonic love. Um, and this is actually a little bit of a pet peeve of mine, is that people all the time use Platonic love, the word, just to mean non-romantic love. But it seems like a little bit inefficient to go all the way to bring Plato into it, when all we mean is just not romantic. But it's called Platonic love, because Plato described this, but he puts it in this idea of love, he puts it in the mouth of Socrates. And even then, in the Symposium, Socrates puts it in the mouth of his teacher, Diotima, this wise woman who explained it to him, and that he shares with the company. And then he shares with the company what Diotima taught him about love. And basically, to really, really cut it down shorter, to abridge Diotima's ideas, or Socrates' ideas, or Plato's ideas about love, it is an idea of love that that moves us from, that begins at its most simple, its most basic step. It's often called the ladder of love, from just lust, from just looking at beauty in a particular individual, and then it moves up to getting a broader view of beauty, until finally you are appreciating true beauty itself. And here's a quote, which maybe would be the sugared sentence that Sir Philip Sidney is referring to. So Diotima says, "This, my dear Socrates, is that life above all others which man should live, in the contemplation of beauty absolute, a beauty which if you once behold, you would see not to be after the measure of gold and garments and fair boys and youths." So you would see that it's not even comparable to whatever you might think as desirable in that first step. You've realized that the absolute true good, the true spiritual beauty. And Sir Philip Sidney has talked about this earlier in number 5 in Astrophil Stella. He says that it's true that true beauty virtue is indeed. So he calls that true beauty that we can rise to appreciating virtue. So now he's talking about, and he says, the wisest scholar of the wight most wise, Plato, with sugared sentence says that virtue, if it once met with our eyes, strange flames of love it in our souls would raise. So if we could see it, if we could just look at it, we wouldn't, like Diotima said, we wouldn't put any account by gold or beautiful bodies or whatever. And then he turns it. So that was wise says, eyes raise. Says and raise seem to have rhymed in Sir Philip Sidney's time. That's the first 4 lines, which is in a sonnet. It's standard for the first 4 lines to be kind of a unit. Or actually, I should say, wise rhymes with raise. And actually, I'm not sure. I'm not sure which way he was thinking about it, because, yeah. Actually, yes, I was right the first time. Wise rhymes with eyes, and says rhymes with raise. So he turns it to another idea in the next quatrain, in the next 4 lines. But for that man with pain this truth descries. And now he's saying, but for that, he means, but because man with pain this truth descries. It's hard for us to discover the truth of how wonderful virtue is, while he each thing in senses balance weighs. So it's hard for us to discover this while we're weighing everything in senses balance. And here, again, something needs to be clarified, which is the way Philip Sidney is using the word sense is not like we might think of common sense or something, but it's like the five senses. He's weighing everything. He's weighing everything in the balance of his eyes, of his fleshly sensual perception. And this in Astrophil Stella, sense is contrasted with reason, with what we could think about in a spiritual way, in a way that's not just based on our senses, which is not just sensual. So, but because it's hard for people to discover this truth while they are weighing everything, while they are analyzing everything, while they are interacting with everything and thinking about everything just through the medium of our five senses. But for that man with pain this truth descries, while he each thing in senses balance weighs, and so nor will nor can behold those skies which inward sun to heroic mind displays. So he can't. He is so bound by his will that bound by his senses that he can't even want to behold that deeper spiritual beauty, that virtue. He's not like the heroic minds, which inward sun, a light inside of them, teaches them of virtue. He's rather someone who's a slave to his senses. And that's the end of the second four lines, the second quatrain. He then goes into the sestet, the last 6 lines, begins a new idea. Virtue of late, with virtuous care to stir love of herself, takes Stella's shape, that she to mortal eyes might sweetly shine in her, that she, virtue, might appear to mortal eyes in the shape of Stella, so that they could love virtue. It is most true, for since I her did see virtue's great beauty in that face I prove, and find the effect, for I do burn in love. So ultimately, he says that for virtue to acquire lovers of these mortals, virtue is taken on, personified virtue is taken on the form of Stella, his beloved, and Philip Sidney is saying, well, or Astrophil, I should say, is saying, well, I find that to be true because I'm in love with Stella. As I look at her, I'm burning with love. Now, ultimately, this is kind of like a joke because he's totally, Astrophil is totally misusing Plato or Socrates or Diotima's ideas about love. He's just saying that she's a personification of virtue, when in fact, he's just on the first rung of the love ladder, which is just admiring someone's physical beauty, and hasn't really ascended to really admiring virtue. He's just being witty. He's just being clever. And that's one thing overall I think about Astrophil and Stella, which is the question of how earnest is it? Because overall, how earnest is it? Because he so often seems to be putting on a display of his wittiness or making jokes. But I think ultimately Astrophil and Stella does have real pain in it, and real emotion, real angst. Sonnet number 25, just a few pages later on sonnet 33, he begins a sonnet, I might, unhappy word, O me, I might, and then would not, or could not see my bliss, till now in a most infernal night I find how heavenly day, wretch, I did miss. I find how heavenly day, wretch, I did miss. And that sounds like he really is mourning this missed opportunity to win Stella's love. But he also does take a lot of time to be clever and to play kind of a philosophical game, a sort of a learned joke on Plato. And perhaps I will talk about some more sonnets from Astrophil and Stella, but you can read it yourself. Sonnet 25, I'll put it in the description though. So till next video, bye.